The mantra our culture has forced on us over and over through the media, the entertainment industry, and the government in legislation are that fathers are worthless. Fathers are dopes, and that fathers are merely second-class mothers. The stories we're told that life would be better if your father weren't in it. Fathers are there to support mom. Fathers are optional. Our cultural hatred of God the Father causes them to snap and sneer at the authority, influence, and love of their earthly fathers. They hate earthly fathers because they hate God the Father. If fathers are merely optional, why do our hearts sing when we hear and see stories like that of Derek Redmond? In the 1992 Olympic Games, there was a semi-final 400-meter men's race that will forever live in the hearts of men. The winner of this race, however, is remembered by few. Ironically, it was the runner in last place that has been cemented in our memories. British record holder Derek Redmond is running in lane 5. He is running well and is one of the favorites for gold when he suddenly pulls up. His hand grasps the back of his right leg. Unable to run, he drops out of view of the camera. Derek Redmond, with torn hamstring, begins to hop on one leg, trying to finish the race. With a face contorted with pain and determination, another person comes running from behind the lone man on the track. This figure grabs Derek's shoulder, and Derek immediately tries to shrug him off, determined to finish. Refusing to let go, Derek realizes it's his father. We see his father say something to his injured son and puts his arm around him. Derek begins to weep as he embraces his father. An Olympic official comes to their side, determined to stop the father and son. Derek's father waves him off, yelling, "Get out of our way." They continue to walk together toward the finish line. Derek is supported by the strength of his father, weeping as his Olympic gold medal dreams die. You've more than likely seen this video. It's been viewed millions of times. Those of you who have seen it, remember it. If fathers are optional dopes that exist merely to support mom, why do we gravitate towards stories like Derek Redmond's story? Why do we crave and hunger for a father that runs to support us? Why is it that we all so badly need a father in our corner? The King's Hall podcast exists to make self-ruled men who rule well and win the world.
Well, welcome, gentlemen, to this episode of the King's Hall podcast. I, of course, am one of your hosts, Eric Kahn. And Dan, what a banger of a cold open.
Yeah, that story every time, man, gets me. I've had to watch it many, many times.
I've actually thought of that clip multiple times while walking up the stairs because we live in such a big old church basement.
You're not going to make it?
Well,
I wish Dan would come and help me, but I'm huffing and puffing behind you.
I've literally got the DOMS, the delayed onset muscle soreness from deadlifting.
Oh, I'm still
walking,
too strong. My muscles
I'm
are
walking
sore.
up the stairs. I can't make it, and I just picture Dan
coming alongside,
picking me up, and Brian like, "No, let him do it." And I'm like,
Let
"Get
him do
away
it.
from us,
Get
Brian!"
out of his way.
I don't have DOMs.
Yeah,
Don't
you
have any
to
of that.
Lift to.
Oh, yeah.
but you
So
had-
my
you
muscles
had,
feel great.
You had muscle soreness from lifting children.
That's an injury. That's not DOMs. Brian,
guys,
how you doing?
Speaking of injuries, Brian, you're here with us, and
wait a second. Wait, I did actually end my illustrious lifting career, most recent lifting career, with a back injury, which is healed now, and I'm just using it.
but
I'm knocked
ultimate
off the
old
horse.
man move.
Yeah, I'm like, I hurt myself a year ago.
I feel like it was put an end to your powerlifting hopes.
See, my problem was that I was lifting too much. The human body has certain physical limitations, no matter
Like
how strong you are.
3 digits.
I was in triple. My deadlift was in the 3 figures.
3 figures.
3
Wow.
figures.
That's
Yeah.
impressive.
Like the people at the gym I was going to, can't remember the name of it at this point. They were intimidated.
They were all staring. I don't know if they were intimidated, but they were definitely watching.
They were watching partly because I lifted in blueberry colored Nike basketball shoes, ill-fitting sweatpants, and I looked ridiculous every morning. You know what, Eric? Here's what I want to know. What I want to know is why this season of the King's Hall, I'm being forced to watch every YouTube clip that is capable of making a grown man cry.
Yes.
And could we stop doing
Could we
that?
please?
So when I was preparing for this episode, I plumbed the depths of YouTube for father stories. And there was one day, you guys were gone. I don't know where you were.
Dan
But
was just weeping in his office.
Ben was here, and I couldn't talk to Ben because I kept crying. There are stories where there's like a guy who's taking his son to his Little League game, and the son is sad, and then you realize, like, oh, it's the kid's birthday, and he thinks dad forgot. And then he's like, son, go in the back of the car. I've got something for you. And it's a new bat. And he's like, you think I forget my boy? You're my boy. You think I forget about you? Go hit a home run. And then the next clip is him hitting a home run while his dad catches it.
Oh, come on.
And I'm like,
Get out of here.
I'm done. I'm going to go home.
I'm going home. I can't work under these conditions. That's what I want to know. It's just, and you're probably feeling the same way, listeners, because I know a lot of you try to listen to this podcast when you're working. You're like delivering packages for UPS, and people are like, "Is that guy okay?" He's like, just listening to the Kings. He's just listening to the King's Hall cold opens.
Why do we hear whimpering from Dan's office?
Yeah,
It's because of these stories.
It's because of these stories.
Well,
Yep.
I love the one today. We're specifically in this episode talking about why we need fathers in our corner. And for a lot of us, I think it resonates for kind of two reasons. One is some of us, maybe there's guys listening who didn't have that.
Yeah.
But we can still recognize that it is a much needed thing in our culture. So, guys, I want to get just your take on the cold open. We've been talking about this, but what is it at heart that resonates about this story that we find so powerful? Because as Dan mentioned, what's interesting is this guy didn't win. This
No.
isn't really a triumph story, but it is.
Yeah.
So why does it resonate on this father-son level?
Well, it's really interesting you say that it resonates because obviously we have evidence of that just by the views and like that it affects all of us. But in the video, if you guys go watch it or you listen to the cold open again, you will hear the crowd just going nuts.
Yeah.
As dad is supporting his son across the finish line. I mean, the crowd is absolutely going nuts. I watched some interviews later from Derek Redmond. And he said that he still to this day, this happened in 92, he still to this day gets letters from people, I'm sure
Really?
emails or social media messages saying like, it changed people's lives. And he's like, I don't get it. It's my dad and it was a really special moment. I was just upset that I didn't win, But it does ring in our hearts, and it does because we all want a father that comes running to us, that will coach us in our time of need, that will support us in our time of need. When things are rough, when you encounter hardship, you really do desire to have a father that calls you up. And in fact, it's a reflection of God the Father.
Yeah.
You see this over and over and over again in the Psalms as David calls on God to help him in his time of need.
Yep.
And it's part of our humanity, in our image, in the way that God created us in needing a father. And I think that's why it hits home so hard.
And there's so much to that story even that sort of holds up the punchline. The punchline of the story being the father coming and taking his son's arm and, shooing off the best, when he's like,
That might
"Get
be the
outta
best
here,"
part. Get away
to the
from
Olympic
us.
official.
Get out
"You
of our
go,
way."
Get out of my way. Like, get out of my way. He finishing this race. And he's like, but he's disqualified. The stupid Olympic official, like, it doesn't matter. That the point of the video wasn't that. But there's so much under, holding up that punchline. Like, I think the fact that his father was there, like, what does it say that he was standing there on the sideline? Think about his son's career. Like, this is a father who has probably poured for years and years and years his heart, soul, money
Into like the most boring observer sport ever.
Oh, you run fast. Like, cool. I don't think I've ever watched a race,
Really?
foot race. Like,
Are you
I don't think
serious?
I ever
You've
have.
never watched the Olympics?
I've watched the Olympics. I've actually watched them in person. standing next to the gold medalist's mother.
Winter Olympics, which is like the
Oh,
B-League Olympics.
Ross Powers, look it up. Gold medal, men's halfpipe, winner. I was at the halfpipe sitting next to his mother and brother. And you know what? His dad wasn't there.
Interesting.
Oh, I wonder why that was. Anyway, you see the father in the 92 Olympic story, which we're actually talking about.
Yes.
And I just think the symbol is so powerful because you know that this father, I mean, almost for sure, has been pouring his heart, soul, mind, and strength into pushing his son forward in this elite vocation. You know, he
was a British record holder.
Oh, okay. He was actually like
he was actually like really good. He wasn't like, well, you know, give him a participation ribbon. No, he was actually really good.
But it makes me think, you know, that father, one of the aspects of being in your children's corner, and I'm sure we'll talk about this more as we unfold this theme and this thesis, but is just that the father had to, at some point, hand the torch to where a father has to go from, I'm going to succeed as a man, to now I succeed as a man by making sure that my children succeed. And at some point, there's a shift where your children's success actually becomes, in many ways, a central part of your mission as a man. And that father, I mean, I don't know everything about him, but I'm assuming based on his whole demeanor and being present there at this, you know, that father had probably understood that. And to me, that's a very powerful aspect of this story and stories like it, because many, you know, probably the majority of children don't have a father who at that key point turned and said, I'm going to make your success a central part of my mission.
Yeah, and I think so much, like when you think about the church and even what we're trying to do with the King's Hall, so many men come to the church and they kind of get kicked, right? We've all heard the cliche about, you know, Mother's Day versus Father's Day sermons. But I think one of the things that we're trying to do is be those church fathers who are saying to our men, like, you can do this.
Yeah.
And there's going to be, this is the other point. I look at that video and I think, what about all the hard years before that race?
Yep.
So I was thinking about this. I saw on our friend Matt Patrick, pastor at the Well in Boulder, he had this video, and it's actually pinned. You know, you can check out the video on his Twitter feed. But it's a story of Tyler Gilbert. So Tyler Gilbert is a pitcher who came up, ended up starting for the Padres. And it's an amazing story. So he spent 7 years in the minor leagues. So you think about
7 years?
7 years.
These guys don't make any money.
His dad's cheering him on. So they have this really powerful video. He gets his shot. He gets to start a major league game for the Padres. He goes out. He throws a no-hitter.
No.
Whoa.
And the best part of this video, like, it makes me emotional just thinking about it and watching it. His dad in the last 2 innings is going nuts. I mean, the biggest cheerleader that you've ever seen.
Yeah.
And you think about, again, fathers are there for those 7 years too.
Yep.
Right? For all those moments where it's like you're not succeeding, but dad is saying, stick with it.
Yeah.
You know, I was watching the video yesterday and I was thinking about, you know, okay, so there's somebody that's helping Derek Redmond finish this race. Would this video, you think, in your opinion, have the same impact if it was the coach or a teammate?
No, never would have made, not even close.
No, I think
not even close. I think, in fact, I don't even think we would ever know about it if it was just a coach or a trainer or a friend.
Because you think about other moments. I remember Bob Huggins. He was a West Virginia basketball coach. They made it deep in the tournament one year, and his star player like blows his knee out gruesomely.
Ugh.
And Bob goes on the court. But this is a coach. He goes on the court and he's like holding him, like very affectionately. He's like kissing him on the cheek and the forehead, like just trying to comfort him. That was powerful.
Mm-hmm.
But it didn't do what this video did. I think largely because he's a father-like figure, but there's something about it being actually his dad, his father.
Yeah, the fatherhood in the story is a major note. It's the thing that I think resonates so universally because all of us have a deep longing to be fathered. All of us have a deep longing to be loved, to have a father who's actually in our corner. I do think that there are elements, obviously we've talked quite a bit in this season already about the way that fatherhood functions as a type for many other activities, and we have city fathers and church fathers, and one thing I think that you can see going around this whole dynamic of fathers being in your corner when it comes to the church, there's this phenomena that has really, I think, gave birth to the church planting movement of about 10 years ago. That 2007 to 2014 or so, just absolute rush to church planting. Well, a lot of what drove that was that you had church fathers, older pastors, who never made that transition from making sure that the thing you must do as a man, making sure you succeed at your mission, to then pointing downstream and saying, now my mission succeeds by making sure other men succeed at their mission, by being fathers to pastors coming up. So we had, a generation there where I think a lot of it lands on baby boomer pastors who were, they had pulpits. They were the senior pastors, teaching pastors. They had grown churches, pastored them for a long time. And they were coming to this critical time when what they needed to do was raise up young men.
Pass the torch,
give them opportunities for preaching, give them real meaningful training, say there's a succession plan in place. I'm not going to be the senior pastor into my 80s because most of the time that's a bad idea. I'm actually going to pass the torch. I'm going to become a coach, a father, a mentor, and give you a shot. And instead what happened was a huge number of these competent young men were basically told, well, I'm sorry, till I die, youth pastor's the ceiling. You might be able to be a $20,000 a year youth pastor. And a lot of these guys, they went out and they said, like, what, is there another way? And then they found fathers. They found Mark Driscoll's and Matt Chandler's, and they found fathers who would empower them. And they said, young men, go plant churches. And to me, like, that's the demographic story underneath the whole Acts 29 and that church planting wave that we saw is really about a failure of the point that we're talking about today, of properly being in the corner of your children in all aspects of fatherhood, including church fatherhood. And you see what happens when that fails.
Yeah, that's really interesting, especially, Brian, I was thinking about the father type. So I want to draw this together with a father type, and this is going to be King David. So he's sort of I don't know what you would call him, a Christian nationalist father. In this case,
Christian nationalist.
Yes, I worked that in. So 1 Samuel 22, we find a picture, I think, of where many men are today. And this is also something about the movement as we think about movements in the church, but in culture as well. You find, I think, guys in the passage who are disaffected, and we'll read that in just a second. They feel like no one is in their corner, and so they're going to gather around David, who is a man in their corner, and these men become the mighty men. So sort of a powerful story. This is 1 Samuel 22 and verse 22. It says this: David departed from there and escaped to the cave of Adullam. And when his brothers and all his father's house heard it, they went down there to him. And everyone who was in distress, and everyone who was in debt, and everyone who was bitter in soul gathered to him. And he became the commander over them. And there were with him about 400 men. So it's first of all interesting, guys. You look at the kind of men that were gathered to David. Do you think this is an accurate description of the kind of men who are out in the world today, even in the church? And you think about the descriptions that are used. They're in distress. You have people who are in debt. You have people who are bitter in soul. Do you see that as accurate today?
I mean, there's just absolute waves of these kind of men. Bitter in soul. Everyone in debt, everyone is in distress. I mean, in many ways, this could unfortunately describe a massive portion of the 30 and under men in our nation. I mean, they're broke. They have far less wealth than their parents at that age. They don't see a meaningful path forward to some of the normal markers of becoming truly adult members of society: marriage, childbearing, having a house, your own place. A lot of them see those as insurmountable obstacles. They're stuck in endless loops of dating and sleeping around, casual sex, all of the failures of fatherhood in the sexual revolution, bearing fruit there, our monetary policy enslaving them. And so a lot of them are they're either giving up, they're disaffected, or they're miserable and don't know why. I mean, I think it's crazy how accurate that description is.
You know, even looking at the nature of the work that's available for most younger men, it instead of, you know, we look at factory work and turn our noses up at it, you know, and it is a form of slavery. I'm not saying that it's ideal, but at least in a factory, you were building something. Now you're either in a cubicle or you're working from home in your pajamas and don't have to get dressed for a week. Yep. And you're doing something that's probably pretty worthless.
Probably working for a lady HR rep who is insufferable.
Continually sending trainings your way, sensitivity trainings.
Another training, mommy? Yes, you have to learn how to embrace your inner transsexual today, or we will fire you.
It is actually weird, Brian, because we were talking about the HR director, and I think back like almost every corporation I was a part of, there was some like on the surface sweet old lady who actually was Dolores Umbridge.
Oh yeah,
who ran HR
of both sexes, women of both sexes.
Yes, which is kind of it's a weird feature, but I think as leaders, so if you are a father at any level, city father, father in the church, father, biological, you know, etc. You've got to realize this is where men are.
Yeah.
And so I think that the second point to it is that it is an opportunity for leaders.
Yeah.
So I want to ask you guys simultaneously, what do you think attracted these people to David? If you think back on the story of Samuel, it's got to be that these people have, you know, he's just been chased away by Saul. He's been rejected. But this also elevates him to a position where there's got to be appeal here for these men to come to him. Right. So my question is, and maybe Dan will start with you. Mm-hmm. Why do you think these men went to David?
Well, I think just simply David is a king. Mm-hmm. Like he hasn't taken the crown at this point. Mm-hmm. But from
he's slain his 10,000s.
Yeah. Well, and Goliath, like, I mean, so these men are familiar with this guy's reputation. And obviously Saul is wicked. And so I think that they were able to relate to him as an outcast in a way because he didn't hold the official title of king. They were attracted to him, and then he also had a reputation of being a man's man.
Yeah.
He's also very honorable, which is something that when you're probably disillusioned with the world around you and you don't feel like there's hope and you're a slave to debt, to work, you're bitter, and there's somebody that looks like they have it together, that, you know, they've risen above the slums, you know, above the fray of this world. That's probably quite attractive.
Yeah. David was like a national celebrity at that point. The women singing his praises. And he was a national celebrity as that. He was a national celebrity as the honorable warrior who could soothe the king with his music. And I mean, he was like this in their eyes, probably this omnicompetent man. Obviously inflamed the jealousy of Saul demonically because of all of these things. But I think David had shown that he wasn't the kind of egomaniac that was like, he had to be worshipped. No, David cheerfully served Saul. That whole time, I mean, he cheerfully served Saul. He knew how to be the second in command. He knew how to be the son figure. He was, and so they see him. But I think also another element that's important to note in this passage is that when you think about the features of the men who were disaffected, who gathered to him, they were in distress, they were in debt, they were bitter in soul. A lot of these describe in many ways, for better or for worse, failures of Saul's leadership, because the ideal king. Obviously, Christ is the ideal king. But the ideal king is a father to the nation, and he rules such that everybody is at peace with God, at peace with one another. They all have their own fig tree. They're all like they all have enough to eat. They have a pathway to do well.
Justice is served.
Justice is served swiftly. Yeah. So I don't know if it wouldn't be fair to say all of these men, every problem they had was Saul's fault. But this is a feature of the world we live in, is that that's how leadership works.
Right. If Saul was a great king, and that was the way that you described his country, it was like, his rule, is that everything was functioning perfect. And then somebody goes like, well, I'm bitter in soul. And we're like, yeah, what's your deal,
but it's
bro?
Your problem.
It's your problem. Everybody else is happy.
Yeah. Well, it's also really interesting because when you think about like our society, there's groups of men who just don't seem to fit in. in particular, I would even look at like the people who follow this podcast. A lot of times it's the guys who end up, as in David's case, like there were 400 mighty men. So these guys weren't like total loser idiots either.
Right.
They had a lot of competency. They were just looking for the right leadership.
Yep.
So as we think about as fathers, just to give practical encouragement here, how do you, in any leadership position, how do you get in these men's corners in a way that is positive? Because I think we'll ask this question in just a moment, but there can be bad ways that people build these, coalitions as well, gathering all the disaffected men, inflaming them in despair.
Yeah.
Whereas we're saying, no, there's actually a leadership opportunity. But how do you practically, Brian, how do you do that? How do you win their hearts? How do you be in their corner in a good way?
So part of it was that I think in David they found a mission and a leader who would send them out and bring them back. I mean, he was the kind of guy that was going to give them purpose. These are men who they're disaffected in society, and David was saying, "Let me give you a reason for existing. Let me give you a reason to use your strength. Let me give you a cause to fight for." And David was going to be their leader. And I think when we're thinking about again this critical point of being in the corner of your children and being a father who's in the corner of your sons and of your daughters, in many ways that's what we're talking about, is being the kind of man who understands the world, understands his own mission, understands what people are for, what men are for, what women are for. And so you have a mission that you can bring your children into and increasingly give them responsibility in, a purpose for being, so that their days and their strength aren't just meaninglessly wasted wandering about disaffected and troubled in soul. I think that has to be a huge part of this story, is giving them, I mean, these guys are like swords. He's giving them something they're arrows. He's giving them something to shoot at.
Well, yeah, no, I think it's a great point. So
Changing my metaphor.
I would say there's fundamentally two things. Number one, you have to see the problem and be willing to speak to the real problems those men are facing.
Yeah.
I think that you mentioned boomer pastors, kind of that whole era of the pastorate. I think one of the problems is this punching down at men and then saying, basically refusing to see the problems of the world they're facing. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of number one. And then two, like mission. I think, again, Dan, you would probably agree, at the King's Hall, we're trying to say like, hey, we see the same problems you guys do. We'll do some analysis of the problem. But fundamentally, we're going to call you to a mission. It's not despair. I think about some of the men going their own way, the quote-unquote red pill movement. A lot of those guys right now are like, yeah, you know what? The system is rigged against you and there's problems with women, so you should just have sex with as many of them as you can. I've seen guys online advocating, don't get married, use women for surrogacy.
Oh, yeah, the black pill.
Yeah, complete black pill. So would you agree with what Brian's saying, just this importance of giving this righteous mission for men?
Yeah, because
being in their corner.
Absolutely. The issues that you get with something like a black pill movement is that you have the first part where you speak to the problems, because those guys are actually really good at that.
Oh, yeah.
Like the whole system is rigged against you, and here are all the ways, even in ways that you didn't even realize. It's actually much worse. And then the solutions that they offer, though, are actually empty and will cause more problems.
Yeah.
And there's really no satisfaction in them. Ultimately, it leads to death.
What's really interesting is you fast forward a number of years in David's life. In David's kingdom, he kind of, it seems like, falls asleep on the throne a little bit. There's good times. You have another generation of young men who are disaffected, who have no place. And it says that Absalom takes counsel with them at the gate, and he kind of feeds. This is not coming in their corner in a positive way, but he feeds their discontent.
Yep.
And he wins and steals their hearts. But now what he's doing is, let's revolt against God's order, the king. I think the black pill, fundamentally, it takes people to this place of, let's just reject everything. Let's kind of be anarchists. We'll be agents of chaos and destructive forces in society. So what would you say to guys? It seems like you have to really be on guard against who are the Absaloms.
Yes.
And avoiding them. So even saying to the young men, don't fall for the Absaloms.
Yeah, like you need to be able to say, Jeff Younger's such a good example of this on both sides, on the absolute, like, clinical, brilliant articulation of the problems, where I've almost never met somebody who is more intelligent, more capable of describing to the bottom everything that is wicked about, for example, the Texas justice court system, where his son, essentially, we've talked about him before, is being legally allowed, to transition by his mother. Father's is prevented from doing anything about it. Absolute wickedness. So Jeff has done this incredible work on highlighting the anti-male bent of the court system.
No fault divorce.
Yeah, the absolute raw deal that men get in the courts when it comes to basically, like, you can marry a woman, be absolutely faithful to your vows that you made to her, provide, build a house, have children with her, and have her leave and steal half your income for the next 20 plus years and your children, and the state will enforce it. And they'll say, yeah, this is good. So the state is absolutely stacked against you. I mean, 400 disaffected men come to David. You could probably find 400,000 or more in America today who have had this kind of story play out to them. And meanwhile, the media is absolutely telling men that they're the problem, completely worshiping women and saying women don't sin. This is the cultural narrative that we've talked about many times here on the King's Hall, and you've talked about on the Hard Men podcast. So Jeff Younger is a great example of a guy who absolutely understands the problems. But then if you listen to some of his solutions on Twitter and et cetera, a lot of what you referenced, it's like, don't get married, essentially because it's such a bad deal. Think about surrogacy, think about these other things, but under no circumstances. And it's such a perfect example of just with creativity and brilliance and rhetorical brilliance, understanding and winning the hearts of the men by identifying with them and then giving them the kind of advice that will destroy them and their legacy forever. And that's the Absalom problem.
And that's where I think reading Jeff's comments, I was like, I feel for his situation. I truly do. It's heartbreaking. But fundamentally, he's calling people to disobey the word of God.
Yeah.
And what we want to do as not Absaloms, but the younger David, is say, no, we're still called to be righteous men.
Yeah.
You can do it. This is part of being in your corner. I think one of the other questions that's helpful to ask here is, what's the opposite of being in someone's corner?
Yeah.
How do you not be in someone's corner? What does this look like if you're not in your kid's corner? And then what happens if you're not in that corner for them?
I think part of it, you can get it wrong in both directions we've identified. You can fail to be in your children's corner and in all fatherly directions, church father, city father, etc., by inadequate or by making light of the problems that your children face. And this can be on levels, it starts with really trivial seeming levels, like where your children are frustrated with something and you're like, it's a 7-year-old level problem.
When I was your age.
Yeah. And you can just jump right to that, like absolutely annoying, what's the word?
I'm actually just shocked.
Pandering? No, not pandering.
I'm actually just shocked that we actually, I think for the first time in the King's Hall, we found a moment where Brian didn't have a word for something.
What is the word I'm looking for, Eric?
I don't know. That's why Ben's here.
It's the word where you are
paranormal.
Condescending.
Condescending.
It means speaking down to.
Oh, you even used the line. Okay. Yeah, it's condescending.
I believe Dan just mansplained to you.
Dan just mansplained, and I needed it, actually. I was lost.
There's actually a really funny YouTube channel. I'm sure it's Instagram and TikTok, whatever. I don't watch that stuff. Anyway, it's Asian dads talking to their sons.
So funny.
It is hilarious.
That guy, emotional damage.
That guy.
Yes.
That's that guy.
It's so funny.
Yeah, it's like, when I was 7, I had one foot in school and the other in starting my own business. While I walked uphill both ways to school.
I get to school, no heat, no air conditioning. Morning, I freeze to death. Afternoon, die of heat stroke. So funny.
Emotional damage?
The best.
Emotional damage.
See, culture has determined that Asians are actually just like whites, so that's not social appropriation.
No, that was perfectly
cultural
legit. But you could fail in that direction where you're failing to identify whether with the 7-year-old level problem or the 20-year-old problem. Like our kids today going out, when we're sending our sons and our daughters out, like they need a father who will be in their corner enough to say, like you can picture like you're behind them, you're in their corner, and they're looking out at the enemies that you're about to send them out to go fight. And if you say, those problems, inflation, silly. Don't be worried about that. Cost of housing, son. No, like you can fail by demoralizing your children, by making them feel like you're not a father that they can actually come and like give their woes to, like David does to his father in the Psalms.
Do you think, we've talked a lot about boomer advice. Do you think giving boomer advice that's outdated, is that a form of basically saying to your kids, like, I'm not in your corner?
Well, what it does is it tells your children you don't understand their problems.
Yeah.
So you can't be in their corner.
What's really interesting, just the statement itself of being in your corner, I would imagine has roots in boxing, by the way. And so I think about it this way. A boomer that doesn't understand the times or the problems that are being faced is like you going out and you're fighting and you're losing the fight. And you come back to the corner and the boomer is like, yeah, that uppercut is really wicked, his left uppercut. So when he goes to punch you, dodge right. But the thing is it's actually the right hook. That's the problem. And so you go out there and then you just get smashed. Yeah, it's harmful as well as unhelpful.
And the equivalent advice is like, if you just work hard and apply yourself, then, you'd be totally like in my day. I got out of high school. I
went to college. I got a job.
I got in the military.
Paid cash for my house.
Military paid for my college, and I went through, and it was all good. And you're like, Dad, but to be in the military today, that they require you to get the baby killing vaccine, and they, like you're working for the rainbow bomb agenda, and you're like, it's a different world. And it's not that you have to, as a father, understand to the bottom every problem. Like, we're all going to be, to some degree, products of our time. Yeah. In 40 years, it's going to be a lot of work for us to understand the world that 20-year-olds coming up into the world will understand. It's going to be different. But a father has to work to understand those problems, not assume that he understands them. A father, to be in a corner, has to listen to his children. He has to say, tell me what the problem is. Tell me what you're facing. What are your trials? And then the main thing I think that children need, they certainly need wise advice and wise counsel. But more than anything, what our children need is a father who believes in them and who will say, I will throw my resources into fighting alongside your battle. Like, I will be the father who comes and holds up the son and doesn't just give platitudes from the sidelines.
Yeah, this is actually helpful. So I looked this up while Dan mentioned it. It is an idiom that originates with boxing. The trainer is a person who comes to the boxer's corner between rounds to give water, advice, and medical help. So I naturally was thinking of one of my favorite movies, Cinderella Man.
Oh, yeah.
Great film.
And I was thinking Rocky, but Cinderella Man is
same
way
deal.
better.
Paul Giamatti in Jim Braddock's corner, obviously hilarious, but there's points where they're joking. He's just encouraging him. One of the things he does is he tries to identify the tactics of the enemy. And then he says, hey, have you noticed that he leans a little heavy after he throws that haymaker? He's like, hit him twice with the left, right? So you're actually coaching your kids up on like, hey, look what he's doing and adjust. Now the other question you might ask is, if boxers are great, right? You think of some of the people who, Jim Braddock, great boxer. Why did somebody who was great still need somebody in his corner? I think it's because we all, in the fog of war, the fog of fighting, we lose track of some of those things. And so you just need some good coaching in the moment. But there's also the medical, right? So there's tangible needs that fathers can meet for their sons, where you are actually saying, hey, here's some money to make that investment. Hey, here's some strategic things. Let's think about them. Let's do this together. But I also think, Brian, it ties into what you were saying earlier. You're not the one in the ring anymore.
No, and that's such a key point, is that we have to understand how being in your corner ties to things like inheritance, handing off of the baton, and understanding when your role shifts from the guy in the front line shooting the rifle or throwing the punch to the trainer in the corner. And so very practically, like we're talking in a lot of pictures, but very practically, I mean, think about this maybe in this way. A lot of our listeners are young men. A lot of our listeners are men whose houses are filled with young children or are about to be in that stage or somewhere around there. And so for us, a ditch that we could fall in is, some of you had terrible fathers who weren't in your corners, or there's lots of failure, would just be to pick at that scab and pick at that scab and pick at that scab. That's not the point of this episode. The point of this episode is for you to think, okay, practically, what are some things that I could give to my children to say, all right, I'm going to identify that one of the problems of maybe the boomer generation was saying, I'm going to teach you self-reliance by kicking you out at 18 and basically saying, I did it, you go do it.
You're on your own.
Not recognizing any of the differences in socioeconomic system or the way, the stage in the reaping and sowing of sin that our nation was in. So instead of doing that, it means right now, men, we need to be thinking, all right, housing sucks. How can I be building an empire in my city so that my children will never have to worry about whether or not they're going to be able to start their family in a house? Not because I'm just going to be they're going to be trust fund kids who get handed everything, but how can I make sure, even if it's meager, even if it's like this was the best that I could do, that I can say, son, you're gonna take over our house that we've paid off. Yeah. And we're gonna live out in the little ADU in the back, and we're gonna help you with the kid. I mean, this is not how a lot of parents are thinking right now in that baby boomer generation. Right. The way that we get in our kids' corner is by practically equipping them and thinking, how can I store up to hand down and make that transition to where my kids know what's happening too, and they know, like, son, I'm getting out of the front lines in a lot of ways. I'm moving to mentor. I'm moving to coach.
Yeah, but the issue is that they don't show up.
Yeah.
They're not the trainer in the corner anymore. Yeah. They're in retirement.
Exactly. They've checked out.
Yeah, they've checked out. And so that is a massive issue of our time, is this lie of retirement. Mm. It's like if the trainer doesn't show up
in the corner, if
yeah, you
retired?
just have to the thing is, what's great about the trainer in a boxing ring is that he doesn't actually get punched most of the time, unless it's in a movie, a really good movie. Then the trainer gets punched.
At just the right moment.
At just the right moment. Yeah, that really fires everybody up. No, but the trainer doesn't get hit. Like, you're not actually the one boxing anymore.
Yeah.
But you are there as a absolutely vital component that will completely neuter, like, the fight if you're not showing up.
Yeah.
All you have to do is show up.
Yes.
Lexi and I did an episode of Bright Hearth recently on grandparents, and we were thinking specifically about how our own parents, some of the ways that they've won at this, that they've done a good job. And I think of my dad, who's, especially in the last, I think, as he's coming to his own retirement age and about to have his second retirement, retired from the military, now he's going to retire from his post-military career. And there have been a lot of times in the last year where he's just said, hey, I'm taking the two boys, or I'm taking the little girls along with my sister's little girl as well. And everything from we're going to get tea with the little girls with grandpa, or we're going to go ride motorized vehicles irresponsibly, right? And that simple act tells me that my dad is in my corner because he wants my children to have the kind of investment. He knows I'm in the thick of it. I'm working every day. I'm like, I'm in that stage of life where you work, like you get stuff done. I'm early in all of my careers, and he's at this mature place of his career where now he can turn downstream and say, I've got the time on a Tuesday morning during spring break to say, I'm taking the boys, not asking for, the relationship is good, but this can be different. And I just think, like, those are these little ways that if you're at that stage, be thinking about this. And if you're not, be thinking about when you get there, how you can. Yeah. How you can win your fights now so that you can have the freedom. You're not always worrying about living paycheck to paycheck in your 60s, so that you have the base from which to bless downstream. But then make sure you do it and don't go on 6 cruises a year.
Yeah. No, as I would so often say, that's huge. I also think when you think of another practical way to be in somebody's corner is think about the boxing analogy again. Like, they go out, they do their, they fight for a few rounds, then they come back to the corner. It's such a good parallel to counseling and young men when you think about their marriages. And so we're talking, a lot of this is like big picture stuff, like legacy, setting people up that way. But it's also in these very practical issues of, like, as your sons grow up, as the young men in the church grow up, they have these issues in marriage. They come to you and you're like, okay, yeah, so when this happens, here's what you do. When you get in this conflict, here's how you make peace. Even things like, oh, okay, so you're having issues with sex life. Okay, well, here's 3 things practically you should be doing. So I think it's also those tactical adjustments in everyday living
Yeah.
that we end up doing so much of pastorally. And our sons aren't quite at that age where they're adults. They're still in our homes.
Yeah.
But there's going to come a time where like we have to set them up well and then be giving that sort of tactical, practical advice.
Because that fatherly input, and pastors do this all the time, it's a kind of fatherly input, pastoral input. It's you have to be seeing what they're seeing. You have to actually care enough about the person to really watch the fight and say there is that moment where those two sharp jabs, he kind of comes down heavy after that big right hook. Hey, you need to come up. Like that requires you to know the situation, care enough about the person to see what's happening. But then when you do that well as a father or a pastor, when you do that well, you're giving the people like 5-minute conversations that could change their whole life. And it's so like people underestimate the value of a word fitly spoken. Being a father in their corner, so much of it is recognizing the sheer power of giving wise counsel in love to a person who knows that you're for them at the right moment in the right way. And that's those are the magic moments where you can absolutely see like a chain of generational dysfunction broken, sin repented of. And sometimes it's frustrating as a father because you feel like you've given the advice 50 times and they haven't listened
And then they're
to
like,
you.
Dad, I watched a YouTube video. This guy said this. And you're like, yeah,
all right.
No, I don't have that.
But the power of
I'm sure my dad has experienced that.
we'll look back and go, oh, my dad did tell me not to do that thing I did.
Well, yeah, like with my fire, story from the last episode. My dad told me to turn the pilot light off in my water heater, and I didn't, and then I almost burned my house down.
Well, live and learn.
You know what? He was really
you
gracious.
fooled around, you found out.
He was really gracious. He's like, yeah, I told you so.
I did tell you that.
But that moment in your son's lives, your daughter's lives, and wherever you are a father, don't underestimate the power of noticing the problems your people are facing and then bringing an encouraging word of wisdom, hopefully in a life gain, wisdom won in righteous living it would be the goal. But that can absolutely change people's lives.
Yeah, and by the way, I would say this to ladies too, kind of the Titus 2 model. This is so helpful. We have a lot of young mothers. It is so helpful when you have an experienced older lady. You're dealing with maybe child discipline issues for toddlers. To have an older lady who's like, oh, yeah, here's what you do.
Yep.
Like, yeah, I've seen that before. Here's what you do. Here's the tactics.
Yeah.
Go and employ them.
Or who comes in and says, you probably don't even realize it, honey. Your life is really hard right now, but you're absolutely being wildly disrespectful to your husband.
Right.
You're being a nag.
Right.
And you feel like you have good excuses because you have all these young kids in your house and work is hard and it's a temptation. But that is also the thing that you start to, where you notice it by its absence in a culture. When this kind of wise mothering and wise fathering isn't present, people get solidified in the most common archetypes of foolishness you could ever imagine. Everyone gets lived out over and over. The loud, foolish woman, the passive or angry or explosive or sexually perverted man. Like people will fall to the sinful type or perversion of their sex or their situation or their stage of life. And so our culture, that what we're describing isn't happening because of what is happening.
Yeah.
Everybody being fools.
Yeah. In a culture that is ruled by peers and not by a mentor, mentee, whatever relationship, you get things like, celebrating the fact that mom got out of bed and put on clothes.
You did
Rosé all day.
Yeah, rosé. Yeah, exactly. And
man.
that's just like self-affirmation for being not a very good mom.
Well, and I think that's the other point,
So true.
One way to summarize what we've been talking about. You think about Proverbs, it's really fatherly, motherly advice to children. Yep. And you notice how it's just ongoing all the time. So to a point Dan made earlier, it requires actual presence and proximity. So I think one thing that we have to do is say, and like Dan, your parents, it's great that they're here. You can't really parent even your adult children. You can't help them if you don't see it, you're not there, you're not in the midst of it. And so I think to encourage a lot of older people, it means that you can't just be like, oh, because I've heard this a lot where people are like, oh, being around grandkids or whatever is really hard for me. It is actually a lot easier to be at Hilton Head.
Oh, yeah.
Like, let's be real. that's a lot more pleasurable. But then you're saying, well, but I need to be there.
Yeah.
We need to actually be near each other, and then you're going to have to work out a lot of issues too. Peacemaking.
Our goal as men and women shouldn't be to grow to the point where we have total ease. Partly for our own souls, because that's bad. That's terrible for your soul to have total ease. Our goal should be, in ways appropriate to our stage of life and place, to be pouring our strength out, what strength we have, what resources we have, for the sake of our Lord and our people, and doing that till we die. Like that, and in that is satisfaction. Because we can't forget that our lives are described as a war right now. We're headed for eternity with our Lord, right? We're headed for eternity. But our lives right now, it's like, I'm a soldier in the fight until I die. I'm at the front my whole life. I'm just at the front in different ways. Maybe I'm not the young man anymore, but like our goal should be, how can I be thinking? And for some older folks, and maybe they're even listening right now, but it might be like, I know it's really comfortable where you are and your kids have moved away and they've established young families and things like that. And maybe think about moving to them. Maybe think about proposing like, hey, we would love to move in and maybe build onto your house or do something where we can come and help out. And like this multi-generational vision needs to be recaptured, I think, if we're really going to be in our children's corner, is where I kind of hope I don't die in a house that my wife and I live in by ourselves. I kind of hope that we end up in some way, maybe with one of our children or, like in that there's such beauty there where they really are going to end up helping and serving if we both, Lord willing, live to an old age and the normal way of old age comes upon us and don't die in a fiery plane crash or something. But like that to me that's the target. That's the compass bearing
when I think
that I want my life to be pointed at.
There's a real tension, right? When you watch the Rocky Balboa films, there's like 100 of them now, including the Creed ones.
I haven't watched any of them.
Really interesting. The one, Rocky Balboa, where he actually does go back and fight, but it's really interesting moving into the Creed movies. Rocky like starts a restaurant and wants to just kind of check out and chill. And then the young man is coming to him saying, no, you need to help me. And so for him, it's a cool story because he's fighting that urge to like, no, I just want to go have it easy. Yeah. And then finally he realized like, no, I need to be there for, Apollo Creed's kid, but it's like a son to him. Yeah. And so I think, again, just to encourage older guys, be there.
We tell these stories because this is a temptation that faces all of us, is to check out in our old age and not pour into the next generation.
Yeah, and I think one of the overarching themes that we haven't touched on but is an important element in all of this is that one of the best ways, you see this in fighters, in these movies that we've discussed, is that the trainer actually believes that their fighter can win.
Yeah, that's so important.
They believe that they can win.
Yeah. They see what the fighter doesn't, in fact.
Yes, that they have more than they think they do. Yeah. And that's one of the, I think, the biggest elements, tying it all the way back to when we talked about the Black Pill movement, having a vision and everything like that, is that one of the key elements is to say that you can win.
It's faith.
And you actually believe it.
It's faith in God, who is the God of your people. Like, that's so important. That's what the Black Pill misses. Is that we actually have a God. If he's given us marching orders that include things like don't have children through surrogates and just check out of society because it's all arrayed against you. Like, if God gave you these tasks and normal duties, like, is he not faithful?
Yeah, he's given you a helper. But he's going with you.
Yeah, well, but then also believing in your children.
Yes.
Like actually having faith in your children. And I understand sometimes you have there is such thing as a foolish son.
Right.
But we need to have faith in our children if we're going to be in their corner.
Yeah, and that would be another point, I think, of the David story is, a lot of people, there's nothing new under the sun. This isn't new. You're not special. Yes, this is a hard time, but don't act like you're the first person who's ever gone through, an era of disaffected men. Dan, I want to tie this together to a clip I think that you're going to walk us through, but we're talking now specifically about fathers lifting up their children. So what are we going to be watching? Why is this important?
Yeah, well, I'll be watching it. Everybody else will be listening to the story of former NBA player Walter Bond. So this is a speech he gave. It's a rousing tribute to his father. So Walter was playing in the first game of his senior year in high school. He was a starter in great shape, but unfortunately he broke his foot in the first game of his senior season. He broke his foot. So determined not to quit, not to give up, he continued his basketball career in college. He came back. He was playing Division I NCAA basketball against Ohio State. Walter had 15 points, 5 assists, and 5 rebounds in the first half. As the first half ran out, he pivots and snaps up a baseline jumper and breaks his foot again.
Oh,
He made the shot, by the way.
impressive and brutal.
Yeah, he made the shot. But this is where the story begins.
My college career was over. I got offered a job to become a hospital administrator. 2-year program, $75,000 job. And right before I took the job, my daddy called me on the phone. Let me tell you about my daddy. When I was a little boy, my daddy would always pick me up. When he came home from work, he picked me up. When he saw me in the nursery after church, he picked me up. No matter how long he worked, no matter how tired he was, my daddy would always pick me up. So when I had my kids, I would always pick up my kids. When I got home, sometimes I was tired. They have a bottle in one hand, and they just lifted up the other hand, and they knew what daddy was supposed to do. My job was to pick them up. This is a spiritual interaction. When you pick up a child, it is a spiritual transaction. When you pick up a child, you change their perspective. When you pick up a child, all of a sudden they can see the world the way you see it. I don't care what your children have done, there is nothing they can do for you to stop picking them up. Well, my daughter's a drug addict, I don't care, pick her up. My son messes up, I don't care, pick him up. I don't care. You pick them up. That is your job, mama. That is your job, daddy. That is your job, grandma. That is your job, granddad. Your number one job is to pick them up and change their perspective. My saddest day, one day, my daddy looked at me and he said, boy, you too big. I can't pick you up anymore. But when he couldn't pick me up physically, he would pick me up emotionally. He would pick me up spiritually. I had a great dad because he would always pick me up. He would always change my perspective.
I just wish I was black sometimes.
Actually, when I was listening to that, I was like, can I please be a black preacher?
Like, because if I do the motivational black preacher voice, everyone would be like, "Excuse me," and they should. They should be like, "Please stop."
It's not like your Asian impersonation,
Which
earlier.
is spot on. It's a spot. Okay, I'm not going to ruin the moment,
No,
but
please don't.
Yeah, it's powerful.
It is jarring though for us talking after that.
it is.
By the way,
I know. I'm sorry.
So one of the points he makes quite well is that fathers are supposed to pick up their children, to raise up their children. And so, I mean, it's a good picture, you know, like the bottle in one hand and the arm in the
so
other.
good.
I mean, it's like,
I
any
mean,
of us
my
that have
kids-
had kids.
My
like,
kids
you
didn't
know.
have a bottle. I also was interested in the baby bottle. It was just attached to my wife, but moving on.
Oh my God. This is not Brightheart, okay?
I'm sorry.
Keep the sex out of the podcast.
Hey, listen, that was my bad. I just want you to know.
By the way, if you guys are looking for electric energy in a podcast, I would encourage you to check
Sexual
out Bright-
tension.
Sexual tension.
Listen,
Yes.
that is an exaggeration. We're very, very restrained.
I doubt it.
And yeah, but powerful. Yeah, powerful picture. Your kid lifting. You know what it reminds me of?
Picking up your kids.
It reminds me of the
Please don't say
the Joe Rigney. No, it reminds me of the Joe Rigney quote that we've referenced from The Things of Earth, where he says his son, looking up at me, reaching for God. Like that is supposed to train in both directions, us to understand the Father better, and for our children to understand the Father better as they do reach us. But the aspect of that clip that was the most interesting to me was I never thought about it like this. Children do want to be picked up because they want to see from your perspective.
Eye to eye.
They want to, like, they're that's why they climb on the counter all the time, and they're trying to, like, always get up with you, even though you're like, you've been held for 4 hours. My arm is going to fall off.
Yeah.
Seeing from your perspective.
Yeah. I think that's why it's so powerful when you talk to an older person and they're like, oh, that's a tough situation you're in. I bet you're going to be tempted to do this. Don't do it.
Don't do it. Bring them to another perspective.
Yes. Yeah, I think that's why advice like that is so helpful.
Mm.
You know, being able to see from a different perspective, being lifted up by somebody that has more experience than you, that has walked the hard paths, that has had the same temptations, you know, and for them to raise you to their perspective so that you can see through their eyes. I think that's why having somebody in your corner like that will lift you up is so helpful and so powerful.
Yeah, I was going to ask, Dan, that like a natural question for me that comes from that is, what are some other ways it means to pick your children up? What does that look like in everyday life?
Yeah, so one of the things that can be really helpful, I think, is to bring level-headedness to situations, right? So just like, you know, the boxer being beat up in the boxing ring, the trainer is separate from that, right? He's not the one getting punched in the face. You know, just like my younger kids, they're emotional. They're probably causing a fuss of some sort or in a fight, or, you know, even in guys that are younger, they're out there, they're just working hard. They're just taking punches. They're trying to get by, trying to feed their family. You know, one of the things that somebody in your corner, somebody that has wisdom and experience, a father can do is be separated from that in the trenches moment, but having gone through it before, and to provide a level-headedness and wisdom within the situation.
Yeah, it kind of helps to be a field general in that sense.
Exactly. Yeah.
You
They
see
can
the
help
whole
direct
battlefield.
you. Yeah. Just like you said, like a good trainer will show strategic weaknesses in the opponent and correct mistakes. But you can only see that if you're removed from the situation and you have experience to talk to it.
Yeah, it's also interesting. I've seen some of this in your corner type coach trainer thing, which, by the way, I think this is why men are so attracted to the coach model.
Yes.
But even with Matt Reynolds at Barbell Logic, you know, I tried to lift, do barbell training, and I'd kind of max out and, you know, pull a Brian, i.e. pull my back. And, you know, it was just discouraging. And I never really made very great progress with it. But it really did change, you know, like filming workouts and Matt's, you know, giving you coaching, encouragement. And a lot of times in really unexpected ways where it's just like, hey, great job, keep doing it. And like that almost sounds dumb to me that would be such an encouragement just to have somebody watch your training video and say, hey, great job, keep going.
And you trust that they know what they're talking about.
Yeah, because he's been through the training regimens. He knows. In the moment, I feel like, I remember I was at like 250 pounds on deadlift, and I tried to get 3 in this one workout, and I got like 2.5. And I'm like, dude, I can't do this. Like 250 is just way too heavy. And Matt was like, no, this is part of the training, you know. Like you said, Dan, keeping a level head. He's like, here's how we're going to structure the workouts, blah, blah, blah. The original goal was 300. So I eventually get to 300. And I was so excited to share that moment with Matt. Like it was like late at night, I was working out. I sent him a text I said, hey, I got, 300 pounds. And I'll never forget Matt's response. Like, he was sharing the excitement with me as a friend and coach. He was genuinely excited. But he said, he's like, 330's next. And I was like, I kept thinking about the psychology of that moment. I was like, why did he do that? Like, he celebrated with me, and then he was like, 330 is next. I think it's also because fathers, in picking their sons up, you have to be continually showing them you can do more than you think you can.
Yes.
Yeah.
Be patient with the process. Keep working hard. And my sights were set at 300. I got there, and I'm like, okay, I'm good. And Matt's like, no.
His sights are probably set at like 500.
Yeah.
And he's
Yeah.
like, well, we got to get to 330. We got to get these smaller
And
jumps
then I
out of
did.
the way.
I got to 330, and Matt's
Yeah.
like, I was like, dude, I got 330. I'm so excited. And Matt's like, 400 is right around the corner. And I'm like, it's so encouraging. And it seems very simple, but I would argue most men don't have that in their life.
No, that's the thing. These are not most of the problems in our fatherhood culture. They're not like Matt. You don't need a PhD.
No.
They're the most simple things that you're like, oh, you could tell that to 20 dads. They'd be like, oh, I know that. Well, 18 of them probably aren't doing it.
Yeah.
Like, that's the sad part. Knowing is not doing.
Yeah, I mean, some of the simplest things that a father can do to their son or daughter is if they're actually worthy of praise, first of all, if they're actually going for it, if they're actually doing good work, saying, I love you, I'm proud of you.
Mm-hmm.
You can do it. Like those things seem like Hallmark card cheesy, but they're not. They're actually really important.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hugely important. Dan, I think we're going to watch a second clip.
Yeah, that's right. So Walter goes on to share how his father did this for him, how his father lifted him up.
So my daddy called me on the phone. He asked me a question. He said, son, you had a tough year. What's next? I said, Dad, I'm going to be a hospital administrator. He said, not bad, but let me ask you a question, son. Do you believe you're an NBA player? You can't outproduce your self-image, son. If you don't think so, go take the job. But if you believe you're an NBA player, go for it. My dad had the self-control and discipline and waited for my answer. And my answer was yes. You're right, Dad. I can't work the rest of my life. But playing in the NBA is a dream I've had ever since I was a little boy. He said, go for it, son. I limped back into my coach's office with a cast on my foot. I said, Coach, what do I need to do to play in the NBA? I asked that question 4 years in a row. With tears in his eyes, he said, son, when I recruited you, I heard you was a mama's boy. But I'm here to tell you, you just like your daddy. But what do I need to do to play in the NBA? He said, do two things you can play in the NBA. Lose 20 pounds and shoot a three-point shot with range, you can play in the NBA. I think you should be a motivational speaker, son, but if you lose 20 pounds and shoot a three-point shot with range, you can play in the NBA. I lost 20 pounds, and every day I would shoot 500 shots a day, every single day. I got invited to training camp with the Dallas Mavericks, and not only did I make the team, I became the first ever undrafted rookie free agent in the history of the Dallas Mavericks to start opening night. Could you imagine what was going through my mind? I had not started a basketball game since high school. I got to the arena and they dimmed the lights and they put the spotlight right on me. Right through the spotlight, I saw my mom, my dad, and all my brothers and sisters. They surprised me at the game. Then I saw my dad. And I just pumped my fist. And he pumped his fist. And tears streamed down my face. Thank you for all those timeouts. Thank you for making sure I was always home when the streetlights came on. Thank you for making sure I could always hear your voice. Thank you for always changing my perspective.
That was almost as good as the Kings Hall cold open.
That was
We should just have Walter read the cold opens.
Dude, Walter Bond?
Yeah.
Oh,
What?
you said Walter Reed. Is that who it was?
Walter Bond. Walter Reed Medical Center.
I said we should have Walter read
Oh,
the cold opens.
I went my brain totally. Let's just cut this out. I was so confused.
I'm still very confused.
But
I'm dumb. That's the bottom line. That's all
super
you need to know.
powerful. And I think the main takeaway for me, gentlemen, is if Muggsy Bogues could play in the NBA, I'm 38, but I can do it.
That's the takeaway. If your dad believes in you.
Yeah.
No. What I love about the story is that because the dad understood that for his son, that wasn't an unrealistic thing. That wasn't like, you shouldn't tell your kids, yeah, just let it all ride on playing in the NFL. Like most of us, it's not going to happen. But his dad really knew him enough, and he was like, no, I think my son can play on the NBA level if he puts the work in and does it. So don't settle, and if don't play the safe thing. That's just another example of when you're in their corner, you know the kid, you know the world, and you're bringing in that. He needed that extra courage from his dad, the permission almost to go and try this really crazy hard thing and not take the safe path. So Dan, when you talk about like level-headedness and difficulty, bringing wisdom and experience, it was like he needed his dad to do that for him. And the sad thing is, I think, what would the world be like if every son had that? Can you imagine what the world would be like if every son had a dad like that?
I think particularly because of boomerism in America, and that whole mindset. I think what we tend to hear more of is play it safe, get the corporate job, just do what you're told. And it is just such a wise fatherly thing to be able to look at your son and say, you can do more.
Yeah.
In an encouraging way. Again, I would think of like Teddy Roosevelt's father. Teddy, you have the mind, but you have not the body. You're going to have to buffet your body.
Yeah.
And so I want to challenge you. So his dad bought him a weight set, and he was like, you need, basically, to quote the hard man, you have to get hard.
Yes.
Wow.
Thank you, Eric.
Wow.
No, so true.
So there were a couple of things from that video
Discipline.
that I thought were quite profound.
Yeah.
So the first was when Walter asked his coach, what do I need to do to get in the NBA? And his coach says, son, when I recruited you, I was told you were a mama's boy, but you're just like your daddy. Why is that statement so powerful?
Well, it's because every young boy growing up has to do this thing. Leon Podles talks about it in his book on the Church Impotent, about how every son has to do something that daughters don't have to do. The son has to grow up, and even though he's in the presence of his mother a lot of the time,
He's got to push away.
he has to reject his mother as a model of what he is to become.
Eric just wants to jump in front of you.
And he has to say, I don't want to become my mother. I want to become like my father. I want to be a man. And so that's why it hurts every man. Like every man who's worth the salt, if you told him he was a mama's boy, he'd be like, oh, I've failed. Well, shoot, I failed to become a man. Like every son has to say, the model for me is my father, which is why it's so, there's so much gravity there for Absalom's when there is no father or when the father fails, because the son still knows, I need to find a model. I need to find a man to become like.
Right. Because in Walter's case, that was a compliment. But you could say that to some men, it would be an insult.
And it would be an insult.
Yeah. The other thing that I thought was really, really interesting about this clip is just a short part where he says, thank you for all the timeouts. Thank you for making sure I was home at night before the streetlights went out. And he said, thank you for making sure I could always hear your voice. And maybe he didn't mean it this way, but I'm going to take it like he did. That discipline. Do you think discipline does that? Solidifies the voice of your father, the father and his children?
Yeah, I think big time. It reminds me of something, Dan. I wrote an article for the Learning Well. It's a homeschooling journal. And they asked me to write about reading aloud to your kids. And so why is that important as a father? I don't know how I came across several articles, but they were talking about from the time of birth, if the baby in the womb hears your voice, they respond differently forever to that male voice than they do to their mother. Both in different ways. Good, they respond well to mothers too. But there's something powerful about just hearing a father's voice. The baby comes out of the womb. They said there'll be a room full of doctors. They do these tests. They have the father speak, and the pulse rate of the baby will jump.
Whoa.
Like they know who dad is.
Yeah.
And so I was encouraging people like, yes, they need to hear your voice continually. And they need to hear it, speaking the words of Scripture and praying over them.
Yeah.
And I think so much of what Walter's saying too, so much of the fatherly work of having your voice heard is just in the daily encouragement, the daily discipline. Discipline certainly does it. I think for me, because I tend to be on the spectrum of disciplinarian with my kids, this episode and these clips you've shared, to me, it's let your sons hear your voice in a positive, affectionate, this is my son with whom I am well pleased. Yeah. Like they need to hear that side of the voice as well.
Yeah, and the way that what happens when you have that full range is that the voice of discipline and the voice of love and encouragement becomes your voice ingrained in their head. And that's the goal, is that, and they would hear that those things are connected. That when I discipline my son, like when Walter's dad told him, be home when the streetlights come on, that wasn't the voice, I hate you and I want to crush you and destroy your fun. It was, I know that you're going to need discipline to become everything that you were made to be, for your strength to be used properly, for you to be as strong and as wise. You need to have discipline. And so they even need to hear our voice of discipline as being for them, as saying, I'm disciplining you because I actually want you to be a glory.
Yeah, he who
and I believe you can be.
Discipline his son hates him.
Yeah.
So yeah, I love protection. Dan, any other thoughts on that?
No.
I love it. Well, gentlemen, it's been a phenomenal episode. Dan, thank you for sharing those clips, putting that together.
Yeah.
Very inspired, very encouraged. Speaking of encouragement, we have a new Christendom Press conference.
We do.
And I would say one of my visions for this conference is, look, we know there's a lot of disaffected guys out there, guys looking for mission. You need to connect with other people. I think this will be one of the places you can do that. Brian Sauvé, Pastor Brian Sauvé, from the famous band Imagine Dragons, will be there every time.
Gonna get sued.
Every time. Even Dragons, Brian. We were psalm singing to our heart's delight. We're going to have psalm singing at the conference. Of course, you'll be speaking. We have a special guest who's going to be joining us for the conference and also for Sunday, and that is Pastor Toby Sumter.
So excited.
Very excited about this. This is kind of breaking news, but we also have somebody who is going to be hosting our panels and giving us charges every day. And that person is Pastor Dan Burkholder. He doesn't even know it yet.
Ooh, I love that. I'm hearing this for the first time as well.
Yeah, I thought if we did it on live air, he would just love it even more.
He couldn't say no because it's actually now baked in.
But I think this is one of the things in having Dan, lead the charges each day to close us. I was thinking about you men and what we do on Sundays every week, and we have our pastors giving these charges. And Brian, correct me if I'm wrong, but Dan is kind of the king of them.
Dan is the charge king for two reasons. Number one, because Dan understands what brevity means.
And I can't string more than like 4 sentences together.
Dan knows that the charge doesn't get better the longer it is. 90 seconds of concentrated fire. But the other thing is, Dan is a very direct and clear, simple communicator. Which this is the thing. This is a genuine.
He said simple.
I did not mean simple-minded.
Simple-minded.
No, this is a genuine encouragement for you, Dan, because most of the time that's what we need. That's what we need. We need simple, direct, courageous, clear. Thus saith the Lord to you, both the be a glory and pull your head out and stop doing the things that you're doing.
Yes.
So, man, that's going to be so good at the conference.
Yeah, so the conference, encourage people to sign up for that June 8th through 10th. Please join us in Ogden, Utah. I think it's going to be a great time.
Yeah, link in the description for the tickets there.
A couple hundred of the mighty men gathered.
Yeah, it's going to be awesome.
Very excited about that. Final thing I will say, check out Brian's new album. I keep wanting to say
it's actually
even
not Imagine even. It's Even Dragons Shall Him Praise.
Yes. So where can people find that?
Spotify, Apple Music, iTunes, Tidal, YouTube, Amazon, some other stuff I can't remember. Or my website.
What is the best way for people to support you?
The best way to support the album is threefold.
Wow, that's a big
Become
ask.
a patron, because that's how I fund most of this stuff, is by people like paying for production and all that stuff. Buy the album on iTunes or Amazon and then stream it. If you do those three things, like, you are the top 10% of people who listen to my music.
Oh man, too easy.
Boom.
Beautiful. We do appreciate all of our listeners, including those who support on Patreon. If you're not yet a Patreon supporter of the King's Hall, that goes a long way to furthering this work and the work of New Christendom Press. So we encourage you to support the show and fund more of the content that you love to consume. Until next time, don't stay frosty, but festinolente.
That's right.
I almost did it.
That's right.
I almost did it.